was in college, I was a RA in a really old dorm. This dorm was known to be haunted, but I didn't believe any of it. I was a night owl and would stay up late almost every night, and started to notice that my dorm door would vibrate non-stop around 2 to 3 a.m. At first I thought it was wind from my window, so it really didn't bother me. But this night, my window was closed and the door was really vibrating loudly, so I pulled my phone out and started recording. Till this day, I still can't explain how or why this happened, but it is some of the creepiest stuff I have ever captured on camera.
Okay, it's like 3 a.m. right now. I'm turning the light on. My door is vibrating. This is so weird. But the craziest part of all is, watch this. If anybody's there, stop shaking my door. And it stops. Starts up again. Is there somebody here? I'm checking this out. That's inside outside. And then it just stops, you see. But then there's nothing. Some pretty crazy stuff, like look at that. And just stops out of nowhere. No wind, nothing. Windows locked. Windows locked, you see that? That just happened. We just got that on camera.
After that night, I started recording all the creepy stuff that would happen in that dorm. One night after all the students went home for break, I was left in charge of closing down the hall before I left. I was watching a movie in my room when I heard running on the floor above me and thought, oh boy, the RA on that floor is going to have a long night. And that's when it hit me. I'm the only one in the dorms right now. Who is running? So I got up and investigated, and I never found anyone. I still don't believe in ghosts, but I can't explain the video or the sound of someone running above me when the dorm was completely empty. I have been having paranormal experiences for a while now. Odd noises, things moving places, the bed moving while sleeping, sleep paralysis, my feet being grabbed while sleeping, growling noises, and shadow figures. What happened in this particular situation, though, is by far the most shocking and unexplained of all the events. I was soundly asleep when I felt something grab my arm and pull me so hard off the bed that my bad shoulder nearly dislocated again. I jumped to my feet and ran to turn the lights on so that I could face my attacker. Only no one was there. My arm felt as if I set it in a full blaze and left it there for a few minutes. It burned horribly. I immediately ran to the sink to douse it in cold water as it had already bubbled up. The cold water caused the blisters to burst, and I covered it in burn gel from the first aid kit. I grabbed a seat to catch my breath and try to make sense of what had just occurred, and that's when I snapped these pics. After I took the pics, I went to the ER, and after a brief wait, I went back to see the doc. The doctor came in and asked what happened. Many thoughts went through my mind. Do I tell him and immediately get admitted to the psych ward, or do I lie? Well, I told him what happened, and to my shock, he did not act suspicious. He did not threaten to send me to a padded room in impossible-to-tear smock and pants. He just said, okay, those are second-degree burns. We'll need to clean this and wrap it up. They started an IV and gave me some morphine, which didn't do anything, by the way, then gave me numerous lidocaine injections to numb me. They cleaned it and wrapped it up and sent me on my way. I'm going to let you decide what you think this did to me. However, I will tell you that under my arm is a burn that matches these almost identically, except that it forms the shape of what appears to be the opposable digit. If you look closely, you can see the burn outline of what appears to be a claw or a fingernail. This is not a hoax. There is no trickery going on here. There was nothing even remotely close to me that could have caused this burn. I still cannot explain this. My paternal grandfather moved in with us after my grandmother died. He was overall pretty depressed, so my father didn't want him to be alone, and none of my aunts and uncles volunteered to take him. He stayed with us for 18 months until his death. He was actually pretty healthy though, but rather old, in his mid-90s. My grandpa preferred to stay in the guest house to have more privacy because we were 5 little kids, ages 13 to a few months old, and he was a serious and quiet man. Even though he liked spending his time with us kids, he also liked to have his space. Anyway, I had stayed at home that day because I had a very bad flu. This was the 3rd day in a row that I skipped school, and my mom had stayed with me the previous days. My grandpa, however, offered to watch over me that day so my mom wouldn't miss another day of work. To make this long story short, I went to the guest house with my grandpa and watched some TV. He told me he was going to take his morning walk and asked if I would be okay. I said it was fine and I would just be lying on the sofa. Some time passed and I heard the gate to the guest house open and the dogs barking, so figured it was my grandpa. You know, the normal routine someone would do when getting into their house. I called to my grandpa and asked if his walk was okay, and he answered that it was. I didn't turn around to see him or anything, I was just watching TV. He then told me he was going to the bathroom, and that he would join me after that, to which I replied, okay. I didn't give it much thought, to be honest. I heard footsteps go down the hallway and the door of the bathroom close. Some time passed and I never heard another sound from that area of the house. No one had come out of the bathroom. I thought it was weird, so I stood up and knocked on the door to see if my gramps was okay. No one answered, so I just opened it. There was no one there. I looked in the bedrooms and no one was there either. At this point, I panicked because I thought someone else was in the house, even though the person who answered sounded exactly like my grandpa. I mean, we had a conversation and it sounded just like him. I checked the front door and it was locked, and basically there were no signs of anyone being there, only me. Not even 5 minutes passed after that when I saw my grandpa walk through the front door. I was terrified and confused. I didn't tell anyone about it until years later. After that happened, I had many strange incidents in the guest house, even after my grandfather died. I know this story is going to sound like complete bullshit, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of people who think I really just saw a homeless man walking up to Flat Top, which is why I really don't share this story with many people. But I know 100% that this is true, and that this happened, and that never in my life have I ever seen a homeless man or woman even in the vicinity of the area I was in. I was born and raised here in Alaska. Now onto the story. If you don't know who Chris McCandless is already, he is the main character from the book and the movie Into the Wild, which is based off a true story about a man who dropped everything and decided to live off the land in the middle of Alaska back in the 90s. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, born and raised. I didn't learn much about Christopher McCandless until about a year after this incident, but my friend at the time, luckily, knew all about his story. It was near the end of my sophomore year of high school. My friend Brian and I drove up to the top of a mountain called Upper Hoffman, which is just left to an even more popular hiking ground called Flat Top, which is even higher up. We drove up there to smoke a few joints and enjoy the Alaska scenery. As we were driving back down the mountain, we were approaching the fork in the road that diverges the road between Flat Top and going back down the mountain and into town. We were approaching the stop sign when we both noticed a man who looked to be homeless, but seemingly knew exactly what he was looking for. He was waving us down, and usually if I were driving, I would have been too afraid to stop. But Brian, being the nice guy he is, slowed down and rolled his window down to see if everything was okay. The man thanked us for stopping and then simply asked for the direction towards Flat Top. Brian pointed him in the right direction, and we began driving again. Before this had happened, we were both laughing and very talkative, but I noticed as we were driving away, Brian became silenced and had a look of terror and confusion on his face. I asked if everything was all right, and he said, "That looked exactly like Chris McCandless, the man from Into the Wild." I was confused because I had never heard the name, so he told the story to me. I laughed, telling Brian that there was no way that could have been him, until an unusual thought crossed my mind. We were way up in the mountains, way too far up for any homeless man or woman to ever be walking. You never saw those types of people up there. They're usually located further in town, closer to downtown. We had been located in the woods, surrounded by distant and very well-built houses. Homeless people didn't just walk and lurk around this area. It was too far from where any food or stores were available. Being curious, I then looked up Christopher McCandless. Not photos from the movie, but actual photos and images of him that were found after his body was discovered. He was found dead in the year 1992, even though this happened in 2014. My heart sunk. Brian was completely right. The man we had encountered looked exactly like Christopher, and I mean exactly like him, the spitting image. Dirty and ripped clothing, big curly hair, a beard, and a personality that didn't seem out of the ordinary, but just one of a normal dude. Another weird part is that when we were driving away from him, Brian told me that he couldn't see him in his rearview mirror. It was as if he was never there. After that, Brian and I spent hours looking at photos and reading about him on the internet. We were astounded, almost in disbelief. But we had no other explanation except that we came into contact with the ghost of Christopher McCandless.